June 20th, 1943. 1:42 a.m. 30,000 feet above northern France. The night sky was alive. Streaks of tracer fire carving orange lines through the clouds. The engines of the Handley Page Halifax bomber thundered, trembling under the strain. Inside, RAF Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards gripped the control column, eyes locked on the instruments glowing faintly green in the dark. The flak was heavier than expected. German searchlights crisscrossed the heavens, sweeping the blackness like ghostly fingers. One beam caught the Halifax full-on, blinding white light flooding the cockpit. "Christ, evasive," the navigator shouted. Edwards banked hard. The bomber lurched. Then came the sound no pilot ever forgets, the sharp metallic thunk of a direct hit. The fuselage shuddered. Red warning lights flared to life. "Engine 3's gone," someone yelled. Smoke poured through the cabin, thick and oily. Edwards coughed, slammed switches, tried to hold her level, but the Halifax was dying. Below, the French countryside was a patchwork of moonlit fields. The altimeter needle spun downward. Prepare to bail out. One by one, the crew leapt into the night. When Edwards' turn came, he hesitated, just long enough to see the fire spreading down the wing, licking toward the fuel tanks. Then he jumped. The wind ripped the breath from his lungs. Silence, then the rush of air as he fell through the dark. For a heartbeat, it was almost peaceful. Then the ground rushed up to meet him. His parachute snapped open with a crack. He drifted down into an open field bordered by hedgerows and the faint outline of a barn. The bomber, his bomber, exploded miles away, a dull orange bloom lighting the horizon. When he hit the ground, his knees buckled. The world was quiet again. Just the distant bark of dogs, the faint hum of engines far off. He gathered his chute, stuffed it under a bush, and listened. No shouting yet. No trucks. He was alive. Alone. Behind enemy lines. And somewhere out there, German patrols were already searching for him. He started walking, crouched low, every sound magnified. The rustle of grass, the whisper of wind. Somewhere nearby, an owl hooted. Then, from the darkness, came the sound of boots on gravel. Voices. German. He froze. The words were clipped, routine. Kontrollieren Sie das Feld. Suchen Sie den Piloten. Search the field. Find a pilot. They were close. Too close. Edwards dove into the ditch, mud seeping through his flight suit. His heart hammered so hard it drowned out everything else. The boots passed within meters of him. A flashlight beam swept across the grass, once, twice, then vanished. When the voices faded, he crawled on hands and knees toward the barn he'd seen from the air. Each step felt like a lifetime. The wooden door creaked faintly as he pushed it open. The smell of hay, earth, and livestock filled the air. He collapsed in the straw, chest heaving, and whispered to himself, just until daylight. But daylight would bring more than light. It would bring eyes, patrols, suspicion. And what he didn't know was that someone had already seen him fall. The farmer and the girl. Dawn, June 21st, 1943, near Beauvais, occupied France. The rooster crowed just as the first light broke over the fields. A thin mist hung low across the wheat, glowing silver in the early sun. From the barn-shadowed loft, Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards stirred awake to the muffled sounds of the French countryside, the soft clatter of a bucket, the whinny of a horse, a voice humming faintly outside. He sat up too fast, banging his head on a rafter. Pain shot through his temple. His flight suit was soaked with dew and dirt. His boots, still caked in mud, looked far too foreign for this quiet place. Through a gap in the boards, he saw a man walking toward the barn. Broad-shouldered, weathered face, worn coat. A farmer. Edwards froze. His hand went instinctively to the revolver strapped under his jacket. The door creaked open. For a long second, the two men stared at each other, neither moving, neither speaking. Then the farmer said softly, in careful English, "You fell from the sky last night." "Yes." Edwards blinked. He hadn't expected that. Yes. RAF. My crew's gone." The farmer nodded, glanced over his shoulder, and motioned sharply. "Come down. Quickly." Edwards slid down from the loft, boots crunching in the straw. "My name is Marcel," the man whispered. "You are lucky. The Germans, they look all ready. 2 patrols last night. You stay here. They find you by noon." He walked to the doorway and looked out across the fields. In the distance, an armored car moved slowly along the Date road, gray uniforms glinting in the sun. Marcel turned back. "You follow me. Do not speak." They slipped out through a re-gate, past the orchard and into a line of trees that ran behind the farmhouse. Edwards limped slightly, his ankle bruised from the landing. Birds scattered as they moved, their calls masking the faint crunch of their footsteps. After 10 minutes, they reached a small cottage, its shutters drawn, chimney cold. Marcel tapped lightly on the door. It opened just a crack. A girl's face appeared, no older than 16, hair tied in a braid, eyes wide and alert. "This is Claire," Marcel said. "My daughter." She stared at Edwards. The uniform, the RAF insignia, the dirt-streaked face, then stepped aside. "Vite, entrez," she whispered. Inside, the air smelled of bread and wood smoke. A map of France was pinned to the wall, marked with faint red pencil lines. Edward's stomach twisted when he realized what he was seeing. Routes, names, codes. Marcel noticed his look. "You are not the first," he said quietly, "and maybe not the last." They gave him water, a crust of bread, a threadbare blanket. Claire fetched a basin and began cleaning the cut on his forehead with gentle precision. "Why help me?" Edwards asked, wincing. Marcel shrugged. "Because you fight for France too." From outside came the rumble of an engine. All three froze. A German truck. The sound grew louder, gravel crunching, doors slamming. Voices shouted orders in clipped German. A dog barked. Claire's eyes went wide. "They're searching the houses." Marcel moved fast. He grabbed Edwards by the arm, pulling him toward the back door. Go." They ran to the barn behind the cottage. Inside, Marcel shoved aside a pile of hay and revealed a small wooden trapdoor. Beneath it, darkness. "Get in," Marcel hissed. "Now." Edwards hesitated only a moment before dropping into the narrow space. Claire threw a burlap sack over him just as boots thudded against the barn door. "Aufmachen." The door burst open. German soldiers flooded in, rifles raised, eyes scanning. From beneath the hay, Edwards could hear their footsteps, their breath, the metallic click of a safety being switched off. One soldier prodded the floorboards with his bayonet, inches from Edward's chest. Then silence. The officer muttered something, and the boots receded. The truck's engine roared to life again. When the sound finally faded, Claire lifted the hatch. Her hands were shaking. "They'll be back," Marcel said grimly. "We must move you tonight. Somewhere safer." Edwards climbed out, covered in dirt and sweat. "Where?" he asked. Marcel looked at him with tired eyes. "South. But first, we build something." He turned to Claire. "We start before sunset." "What are we building?" Edwards asked. Marcel gave a faint, mysterious smile. "An escape." June 21st, 1943. Dusk. The outskirts of Beauvais. The day burned itself into a long, nervous silence. Edwards lay low through the afternoon, hidden in the hayloft as German patrols passed down the road every few hours. He could hear the faint rumble of trucks, the bark of orders, the clink of boots on cobblestones, the sound of occupation pressing down on every breath. When the sun began to fade and the first cricket stirred in the grass, Marcel came for him. The farmer's face was streaked with sweat, his clothes dusted with soil. In his hand, he carried a lantern wrapped in cloth to dim its glow. "Now," Marcel whispered, "we dig." Behind the farmhouse, past a grove of apple trees, stood a crumbling stone wall that led to a root cellar. Its entrance was half hidden by ivy. Marcel pulled it open to reveal a narrow stairway descending into cool darkness. The air inside was damp, heavy with the smell of earth and onions. Claire was already there, sleeves rolled up, hands raw and blistered. A pickaxe leaned against the wall beside her. Edwards blinked in confusion. "You're digging a tunnel. Where does it lead?" Marcel crouched and unrolled a rough sketch on the ground. "To the old drainage ditch, beyond the orchard," he said. "It leads to the stream. From there, the woods. The Germans never look there." Edwards stared. The distance was nearly 20 meters, solid clay and stone. "You'll never finish in time." Marcel's expression didn't change. "We have 3 days. Then the next inspection comes. If we don't finish, you die here." And so they dug. Hour after hour, in the stillness of the French night, the sound of picks and shovels echoed softly underground. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across the rough walls. Claire passed buckets of soil to Edwards, who hauled them up the narrow steps and scattered the dirt among the rows of potatoes. They worked in silence, every movement careful, measured. Only when the night was nearly gone did Marcel allow a rest. They sat together, breathing hard in the cool dark. "Why risk all this?" Edwards finally asked. "If the Gestapo find out, they'll hang you." Marcel took a slow breath. "They already took my brother," he said quietly. "Shot him in front of this house last year. He hit a British airman too." Claire looked up, eyes shimmering in the lantern light. "They can take our lives," she said softly, "but they cannot take who we are." Edwards looked away, the weight of her words sinking deeper than the tunnel itself. By dawn, they'd carved a passage long enough for a man to crawl through. The exit was hidden under a pile of rocks near the orchard wall. Claire covered it with straw, her fingers trembling as the first rays of sunlight brushed the fields. They barely had time to clean before the sound of engines returned. Another German patrol, closer this time. Edwards watched from the window as a gray staff car stopped at the crossroads. 2 officers stepped out, one checking papers, the other scanning the horizon with binoculars. They were meticulous, the kind who didn't overlook anything. Marcel motioned for silence. The 3 of them held their breath as boots crunched outside the door. A sharp knock. "Ouvres." "Gestapo." Claire froze. Marcel whispered, "Down. Go now." They rushed to the root cellar, pulling the door closed behind them. The boots moved through the house above, steady, deliberate. A chair scraped. A voice barked an order. Then, a pause. A creak. Footsteps descending the cellar stairs. Edward's pulse pounded in his ears. He pressed against the tunnel wall, dirt sifting down onto his hair. Marcel gripped a rusted wrench, his jaw set. The officer's flashlight beam pierced the dark. It passed over the pickaxe, the buckets, the half-covered tunnel entrance. Another second, one heartbeat too long, and they would all be dead. But the light turned away. A distant voice called, "Rein-ICI." Nothing here. The boots retreated. The car started. Silence returned. Edwards exhaled shakily. Marcel lowered the wrench. We dig faster, he said. Tonight, we finish. But the Germans weren't done searching, and someone in the village had begun to talk. June 22nd, 1943, late afternoon. The village of Saint-Martin-le-Neude lay quiet beneath the heavy heat of summer, its stone streets empty, shutters drawn. But inside every home, whispers moved faster than the wind. The Germans had increased their patrols. Someone had seen something. A parachute, they said. A man in an English uniform, hiding near the orchards. By evening, 2 trucks full of Feldgendarmerie had parked outside the church. They questioned farmers, searched barns, and posted a notice. Anyone aiding an enemy airman will be shot. From the attic window of the farmhouse, Claire watched them in silence. She could see the fear in her neighbors' faces as they nodded and lied to the Germans. A child's cry echoed from a nearby house, and a soldier slammed a rifle butt against the door. When the trucks rolled on, the street looked lifeless, as if the war had drained even the air itself. Inside, Marcel packed a small satchel, bread, a canteen, a folded map. "We move him tonight," he said. "They'll come back." Edwards paced near the table, the tension visible in his shoulders. "What if the tunnel collapses?" he asked. Marcel shook his head. "Then we dig again. But you will not die here, Lieutenant." Claire said nothing. She was tracing a route on the map with her fingertip, south, through the forest, past Beauvais, toward a small village marked Compiègne. "That's where the others go," she said quietly. "There's a train yard. The resistance has a man there who can hide you." "The others?" Edwards asked. Marcel gave a tired smile. "You think you're the first Englishman to fall from the sky over France." He poured coffee into 3 chipped cups. The rich smell filled the room, mingling with the faint scent of hay and oil from Edward's flight suit. It felt almost peaceful, a fragile bubble of normal life holding out against the storm. Then the peace shattered. From outside came a sound that froze them all, the sharp bark of dogs. Marcel rushed to the window. "Patrol," he hissed. "They're checking the orchards." Clay grabbed the satchel, thrust it at Edwards. "Go. Now." They moved fast, through the kitchen, out the back, across the field. The sky had turned the color of iron, clouds rolling in from the west. The first drops of rain fell as they reached the entrance to the root cellar. "Get in the tunnel," Marcel whispered. "Follow it until you see the light. Don't stop, no matter what you hear." Edwards turned to Claire. "You're coming too." She shook her head. "If we vanish, they'll know. We stay." He hesitated, searching her eyes for something to say. But there was no time. She reached out, pressed something into his hand. A small silver cross. "For luck," she said. The barking grew louder. Shouts followed. Marcel pushed him toward the tunnel. "Go, Jimmy." Edwards dropped to his knees and crawled into the narrow space. The air was thick, earthy, suffocating. Behind him, he heard the cellar door slam shut, boots pounding above. He kept crawling. The tunnel grew tighter, the walls closing in. Each movement scraped dirt into his sleeves, filled his mouth with grit. He could hear muffled shouting behind, German voices, commands barked sharply. "Schnell! Durch such an Sie den Keller." Search the cellar. Then, a sound like thunder. A gunshot. Edwards froze. His breath came fast, shallow. He wanted to turn back, but Marcel's voice echoed in his memory. "Don't stop, no matter what you hear." He crawled faster. Dirt collapsed around his elbows. A lantern flickered ahead, the faintest light at the end. He clawed forward, dragging himself through the final few meters until cool night air brushed his face. He emerged beneath the orchard wall, gasping. The rain had become a downpour, masking everything, even the distant shouting. He looked back once. Smoke was rising from the farmhouse. The glow of fire licked the sky. Marcel's home. Gone. Edwards pressed the cross to his chest, the silver slick with rain. He turned toward the dark line of trees in the distance, the forest, and ran. But the Gestapo weren't finished. The man who had betrayed them was still alive, and he had already told them which way the pilot was heading. Night of June 22nd, 1943. The forest of Beauvais. Rain fell in sheets, hissing through the trees like whispers. The forest floor was slick, roots twisting underfoot, mud sucking at every step. Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards stumbled through the undergrowth, soaked to the bone, lungs burning with every breath. Behind him, distant but unmistakable, came the bark of dogs. He ducked behind a fallen log, gasping for air, trying to steady his breathing. In the flashes of lightning, he could see the faint outline of the silver cross in his hand. It glimmered like a promise. He couldn't stop now. Edwards pressed on, pushing through branches that clawed at his flight suit, snagging the torn RAF insignia on his shoulder. Every sound seemed magnified. The slap of rain, the crunch of boots, the distant echo of German voices cutting through the storm. Then, headlights. Two beams pierced the darkness ahead, sweeping across the trees. A truck. Germans. They'd flanked him. He dropped flat into the mud as the truck crawled along a nearby path. Through the rain, he could hear one officer shouting, "Der Engländer kann nicht weit sein." The Englishman can't be far. Edwards pressed his face into the wet earth, motionless. The headlights passed within 20 yards, then vanished into the fog. For a moment, the forest was still again. He rose slowly and continued moving south, guided only by the faint glow of lightning above the canopy. His compass was gone, his map soaked and useless. But he remembered Clay's words, "Follow the stream. It leads to the train yard." He found it an hour later, a narrow ribbon of black water winding through the trees. He followed it downstream, the current whispering like a ghost beside him. Each step was agony. His ankle, injured in the parachute landing, throbbed with every movement. But the fear of capture kept him going. He reached a small wooden bridge and froze. A figure stood on the other side. For an instant, he thought it was a soldier, but then the man raised a finger to his lips. "Anglais," he whispered. Edwards nodded cautiously. The man stepped forward, middle-aged, wearing a soaked beret, a worn coat with a red scarf tucked into the collar. "You're the one from Beauvais," he said softly. "Come, quickly. You're not safe here." Edwards hesitated. "Who are you?" "Resistance," the man said simply. "Marcel sent word before." He trailed off. There was no need to finish the sentence. Edwards looked down, rain dripping from his helmet. "They're gone, aren't they?" The man nodded. "Yes, but their message reached us." He gestured toward the trees. "We've built a line. Safe houses, old tunnels, shepherds who still remember what it means to fight. Follow me." They moved fast, weaving through the woods, staying low whenever lights flickered in the distance. The resistance courier, his name was Bernard, knew every bend, every hiding place, every sound of the forest. After what felt like hours, they reached a small hunting cabin. Inside, a candle burned low beside a map spread across the table. Bernard poured water into a cup, handed it to him. "You'll rest here for a few hours. Then we move you to Compiègne. From there, Paris." "Paris?" Edwards asked. He nodded. "You'll meet the Ruisseau Charlemagne. They move airmen across the city, false papers, trains, neutral zones. It's dangerous, but it works." Edwards leaned back against the wall, exhaustion finally overtaking him. He could feel the ache in his bones, the sting of cold in his fingers. And if they catch us? He asked quietly. Bernard looked at him. A long, steady look. Then we die in the morning, he said simply. But not tonight. A crack of thunder shook the cabin. For the first time since the crash, Edwards allowed his eyes to close. He could still see Marcel's face, hear Claire's voice, feel the rain on his skin. He whispered a promise into the dark. I'll make it out. For them. But outside, just beyond the trees, two silhouettes were moving through the rain. Black coats, pistols drawn, dogs pulling at their leashes. The Gestapo had found the stream, and they were closing in. June 23, 1943, 4:15 a.m. The outskirts of Compiègne. A whistle pierced the morning fog. Long, low, mournful. The sound of a train, somewhere beyond the trees. Bernard's hand shot up. That's it, he whispered. The freight line to Paris. Once you're on that train, you're free. Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards nodded, though his stomach twisted with unease. The sky was still dark, the rain reduced to a fine mist that hung like smoke. The forest thinned ahead, opening to a rail yard bathed in the harsh glow of floodlights. Through the fog, they could see rows of boxcars, guards pacing along the tracks, rifles slung over their shoulders. A German supply convoy, heading east. Bernard crouched behind a pile of crates, scanning the yard. We have 1 minute between patrols, he said. When the next train whistle sounds, we move to the third car. There's a false panel inside, a cruel space. It'll hide you until Paris. He toned, gripping Edwards by the arm. After that, find a man named Lefevre. He'll get you south to Spain. Edwards nodded, heart pounding. What about you? Bernard smiled faintly. I'm staying. More men to guide, more pilots to hide. The whistles sounded again. They moved. Low, fast, silent. Boots splashing through puddles, breath ragged in the cold air. The yard smelled of coal smoke and wet iron. They reached the boxcar. Bernard pried open the latch, waving Edwards inside. Go. As Edwards climbed in, the metallic groan of the door was drowned by the roar of the engine. Steam hissed, brakes released. For a moment, it felt like freedom was within reach. Then, a shout. Halt! Searchlights snapped toward them. Bernard spun, gun drawn, firing once, the crack echoing across the yard. A guard dropped. Another shouted for reinforcements. Run! Bernard roared. Edwards jumped down, landing hard on the gravel. Bullets ricocheted off metal, sparks dancing in the fog. He sprinted for cover, weaving between the cars. The ground shook as the locomotive began to move, its wheels grinding against the rails. Behind him, Bernard fired again, then a scream. Edwards turned just in time to see him fall. Bernard, he shouted. The resistance fighter was on his knees, clutching his stomach, blood seeping through his coat. He looked up at Edwards, eyes burning with urgency. Go, Vite. German boots thundered closer. Edwards grabbed Bernard under the arms, dragging him behind a stack of fuel barrels. I'm not leaving you. Bernard coughed, shaking his head weakly. Yes, you are. They must not take you. He fumbled in his pocket, pressing a folded paper into Edwards' hand. The names, the safe houses, everything you'll need. Then, the distant growl of engines. More trucks arriving. Too many. Bernard's grip loosened. His eyes glazed over. Edwards closed them gently, the paper still clenched in his fist. He could hear the Gestapo shouting, spreading through the yard. Dogs barking. Floodlights sweeping. The air was electric with tension and death. He crawled under the freight car, hugging the shadows, heart hammering against the gravel. A soldier's boots stopped inches from his face. The man lit a cigarette, the glow of the match flickering across the undercarriage. Smoke curled up, blending with the steam. The soldier exhaled, muttered something, and moved on. When the train finally began to roll forward again, Edwards grabbed the ladder and hauled himself onto the back platform of the last car. His fingers slipped on the wet metal, but he held tight. The wheels clacked faster. The yard fell away into the mist. He was leaving Campine behind, but not the sound of Bernard's last breath. As the train rattled through the countryside, Edwards sat alone between two crates, soaked, trembling, staring at the folded paper in his hand. He unfolded it slowly. Names, addresses, routes marked in red ink, the arteries of the French resistance. At the bottom, one word, written hastily in Bernard's handwriting. Marcel. He read it again. The name of the man who had saved him, the man who had died for him. And below it, a note in smaller letters. If you reach Paris, tell Claire her father's courage lit the path. The train plunged into the darkness. Edwards clenched the paper, his jaw tight. He wasn't just escaping now. He was carrying their story with him. But the Gestapo already knew a British airman was heading for Paris, and the city was crawling with collaborators. His next step would be the most dangerous yet. June 25, 1943, midnight, Gare du Nord, Paris. The train screeched to a halt beneath the arched iron roof of Gare du Nord. Steam billowed around the platform, curling in pale tendrils through the dim light. Every hiss and echo felt too loud, too exposed. Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards sat frozen in the shadows of the freight car, the rhythmic clang of couplings vibrating through his bones. When the noise of the station settled, he slipped out into the fog of exhaust and coal dust. He was filthy, hair matted, uniform torn, face smeared with mud. He could have been mistaken for a laborer if not for his unmistakable accent. He adjusted his cap low, gripping the folded note Bernard had died for. At the bottom of it, under Marcel's name, was an address scrawled hastily. Rue Saint-Antoine, Paris, tailor's shop. He moved with the crowd, head down. The station was full of uniforms, Wehrmacht soldiers drinking from tin mugs, officers in black coats checking travel papers. Overhead, a poster declared in bold letters, "Silence, les muses ont des oreilles." Silence, the walls have ears. He left the station unnoticed. The night air of Paris hit him like a cold slap. The damp smell of the Seine mixed with the smoke of ration fires. The city was beautiful and hollow, occupied. He walked for hours, keeping to alleys and side streets, every shadow a potential enemy. Twice, he ducked behind doorways as German patrols passed, their boots in perfect rhythm, their laughter brittle and cruel. When he finally reached Rue Saint-Antoine, dawn was breaking. The tailor's shop was small, its windows shuttered, a faded sign swinging in the wind. Costumes at reparations, DuPont. He knocked 3 times, a pattern Marcel had taught him. A moment later, the door opened a crack. A man's voice, cautious. "Who sent you?" Edwards hesitated. "Marcel, from Beauvais. He told me to come here." The door opened wider. A thin man in his 50s, spectacles low on his nose, motioned him inside. Quickly. Inside, the shop smelled of fabric and tobacco. Bolts of cloth lined the walls, a sewing machine whirring softly in the back. The tailor locked the door behind him. "My name is DuPont," he said. "You're the English pilot?" "Yes." Edwards nodded. "Jimmy Edwards. RAF." DuPont's expression softened. "You're lucky. The Gestapo has been looking for you since Campine. Half of Paris has seen your description." He handed Edwards a cup of coffee, thin and bitter, but warm. "You must rest. Tonight, we move you again." "Where?" "To Montmartre. An artist's studio. They've turned it into a safe house. But there's a problem. DuPont lowered his voice. There's a traitor. Someone in the network has been selling names. Edward stiffened. Who? We don't know yet, DuPont said. But 2 couriers were arrested yesterday. They knew about Marcel. The words hit like a blow. Then they know about Claire. DuPont met his eyes. If she's alive, she's hiding. But you must assume she's being hunted. The silence that followed was suffocating. The hum of the sewing machine stopped. Somewhere outside, a German motorcycle roared past. DuPont sighed. You'll need a disguise. He pulled a gray suit from the rack. Plain, civilian, worn but clean. From now on, you're Jacques Lemaitre, a textile buyer from Lyon. Speak as little as possible. Edwards changed quickly, folding his IAF uniform into a bundle. As he tucked the silver cross back under his shirt, DuPont noticed. She gave you that? He asked quietly. Edwards nodded. Claire. DuPont looked away. She was brave. Her father was one of ours. When the war ends, if it ends, people will remember their names. He reached for a small radio hidden under the counter. The faint crackle of static filled the room, followed by a coded voice in English. Evasive moving south. Network breached. All lines under watch. DuPont's face went pale. They've shut the escape lines. What does that mean? Edwards asked. It means, DuPont said grimly, you're trapped in Paris. He switched off the radio. Outside, church bells began to ring. Soft, almost mournful. Edwards sank into the chair by the window, staring out at the street where German trucks rolled past cafes that no longer served laughter. For the first time since the crash, he felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down, the sheer machinery of occupation closing around him. But DuPont wasn't done. He leaned closer, voice low. There is one man left who might help you. A priest. Father Reynard. He runs a church near Montmartre. He's gotten men out before. He paused, studying Edward's face. But if he's caught, he won't just be shot. They'll make an example of him. Edwards looked down at the folded paper again, at Marcel's name, Bernard's handwriting, the map that had already cost so many lives. He clenched it in his fist. Then I'll make it worth their risk. DuPont nodded slowly. Then God go with you, Jacques. That night, when the curfew sirens wailed across Paris, 2 figures slipped out the back of a tailor's shop, one in a gray suit, the other in a long coat, and vanished into the wet, glistening streets. Ahead, the white dome of the Sacré-Cœur loomed like a ghost in the mist. Somewhere beneath it, in the catacombs of occupied Paris, the resistance was waiting, and the Gestapo was already one step ahead. June 26, 1943, 2:40 a.m. Montmartre, northern Paris. The climb up the cobblestone hill was brutal. The rain had returned, slicking the stones, turning every step into a whisper of danger. Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards followed DuPont closely, his breath shallow beneath the collar of his borrowed coat. The distant sound of laughter drifted from a bar still open for German officers. Hollow, forced, the soundtrack of a city pretending to sleep. They reached the top of the hill. The Sacré-Cœur loomed above them, pale and spectral in the moonlight. To the right, nestled between shuttered cafes, stood a small church, Église Saint-Pierre de Montmartre. Its heavy doors were locked, but the bell tower flickered faintly with candlelight. DuPont knocked 3 times on the side door. A moment later, it opened just enough to reveal a man in a black cassock, face lined with exhaustion but eyes sharp. "You're late," he said quietly. "Roadblocks," DuPont replied. "Father Reynard, this is—" "I know who he is," the priest interrupted. "The English pilot." He stepped aside, motioning them in. The air inside smelled of incense and damp stone. Shadows from the flickering candles stretched across the pews. The faint echo of dripping water resonated through the old church. Father Reynard led them into the sacristy, closing the door behind them. Maps and coded notes covered the table. A revolver rested beside a Bible. "You've stirred up the hornet's nest," Reynard said. "The Gestapo raided 2 safe houses yesterday. They know a downed A-man is in the city." Edward's jaw tightened. "Then we move fast." The priest looked at him, studying the worn lines on his face, the exhaustion behind his eyes. "Courage and haste rarely travel well together, Lieutenant. But you're right, time is short." He pulled open a drawer and removed a worn envelope. Inside were forged papers, a ration card, a work permit, and an identity card bearing the name Jacques Lemaitre. "These will hold up under casual inspection," he said. "But if they take you to headquarters, nothing can save you." Dupont unfolded a small map. "Tomorrow night," he said, "we move him across the Seine. There's a barge captain near Ivry, one of ours. He can get him out through the canal system. After that, he's gone." Reynard nodded slowly. "Then he rests here until nightfall. The church is the safest place left in Paris." Dupont hesitated. "You're sure?" The priest gave a faint, knowing smile. "The Gestapo rarely looks for faith." Dupont left before dawn, blending back into the fog. Edward stayed, helping Reynard light candles before the morning mass, a mass that would draw the very men hunting him. By 8 o'clock, the church pews filled with civilians and soldiers alike. German officers sat near the back, their caps resting on their knees, pistols gleaming under the holy light. Edward stood in the shadows behind the altar, head bowed, heart racing. Every creak of what sounded like a gun being cocked. Reynard began the mass. His Latin words carried softly through the vaulted air, steady, calm, defiant. He spoke not of salvation, but of endurance, of the duty to protect those who suffer. For a brief moment, the entire church seemed to hold its breath. Then, as he raised the chalice, a sound shattered the stillness, the heavy slam of the front doors. 3 men entered. Black coats, armbands, Gestapo. Edward's pulse spiked. The officers of the back of the church turned. Confusion first, then fear. The congregation froze. The lead Gestapo officer's boots clicked against the stone floor. "Father Reynard," he said loudly, his voice echoing, "we have reports that you shelter enemies of the WWII." Reynard didn't flinch. "I shelter souls, sir. Nothing more." The officer smiled thinly. "Then perhaps we should search your souls as well." He signaled his men. 2 soldiers began moving toward the sacristy, toward Edward's hiding place. Reynard stepped forward, blocking their path. "This is a house of God," he said quietly. The officer drew his Luger. "And God does not rule Paris." The shot rang out like thunder. The priest staggered back, crimson blooming across his vestments. Gasps filled the church. Women screamed. Children cried. Edward's instincts took over. He darted from the shadows, grabbed the fallen revolver, and fired. 1 Gestapo officer fell instantly, the second spinning toward him. Chaos erupted. Shouts, panic, gunfire echoing under the stained glass dome. He sprinted down the aisle, ducked behind a pew as bullets splintered the wood. Civilians fled in every direction, their footsteps like drumbeats against the marble floor. He looked back once, Father Reynard lying beneath the altar, his lips moving soundlessly, a faint smile still on his face. Edwards whispered, "Thank you," and ran through the side door into the rain-soaked streets. Behind him, the church bells began to toll, wild, uncontrolled, defiant. Each peal echoed across the rooftops of Paris like a warning. The resistance still lives. But so did the Gestapo. And now, they had seen his face. The city was no longer a hiding place. It was a trap. June 26, 1943, 10 p.m. Banks of the Seine, south of Paris. The Seine was black that night, a moving mirror of rain and shadow. The lights of occupied Paris glimmered faintly on the water's surface, distorted by ripples and the occasional gust of wind. Barge horns moaned somewhere in the distance, half swallowed by the steady hiss of rain. Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards crouched beneath a bridge arch, soaked to the skin, lungs burning from the sprint that had carried him halfway across the city. The silver cross Claire had given him still hung around his neck, now caked with blood and grime. Father Reynard's blood, splattered when the priest fell. Every corner of Paris seemed alive with sound. Truck engines, shouted orders, the sharp whistle of patrols combing the streets. The Gestapo raid at Montmartre had set the whole city on alert. From the shadows came a whisper. Anglais. Edwards turned sharply, hand on his revolver. A figure emerged, tall, wrapped in a heavy coat, face obscured by the brim of a hat. The man raised both hands. Easy, he said softly. Dupont sent me. The accent was French, rough and quiet. I'm Captain Moreau. I command the cell operating along the river. The priest said you might come. Edwards lowered the weapon, heart still pounding. Reynard's dead, he said. Moreau's expression tightened. Then we don't waste his sacrifice. Come. They followed the curve of the riverbank, keeping low. The streets above were alive with boots and flashlights. At every bridge, checkpoints glowed like small furnaces. Soldiers smoking, dogs restless. Moreau led him down to the waterline where a barge was moored in the shadows. Its name, La Hirondelle, barely visible beneath layers of grime. A man in overalls was coiling a rope on deck. That's Francois, Moreau whispered. He'll take you south, Ivry, then past the lock. After that, you'll be beyond the patrol zone. Just like that. Edwards asked, disbelief in his tone. Moreau allowed a faint smile. Nothing is just like that anymore. As they climbed aboard, the faint hum of an approaching truck made both men freeze. Headlights flared along the quay. A voice shouted through a megaphone in German. Alphasius Anhalten. Control. All vehicles stop. Checkpoint inspection. Moreau swore under his breath. They are checking the docks. We have minutes. Francois slipped into the wheelhouse, whispering, I'll get her moving. The barge's small diesel engine coughed to life. Quiet, almost gentle. The ropes fell loose into the water. Slowly, silently, La Hirondelle drifted into the current, swallowed by darkness. Edwards crouched behind the cargo crates, peering through the rain. Patrols with lanterns swept the riverbank behind them. The sound of dogs barking echoed faintly over the water. They had made it, barely. For an hour, they floated south, the city receding into mist and memory. The air grew colder, the silence deeper. Then, just as the faint outline of the Ivry Lock came into view, a spotlight snapped on from the opposite shore. Halt! Gunfire erupted. Short, sharp bursts. Bullets slapped the water, sending up arcs of spray. Francois shouted, down, and yanked the throttle. The barge lurched, scraping against the embankment. Moreau fired back from behind a barrel, muzzle flashes lighting his face. Keep your head down. The searchlight swung wildly as the barge veered toward the far side of the canal, smoke rising from a ruptured fuel drum. Edwards grabbed a rope, hauling himself to the deck to help stay. Cut the line. Francois yelled. Edwards grabbed a hatchet and severed the mooring cable with a single blow. The current seized the vessel, dragging it downstream at dangerous speed. The gunfire faded, replaced by the groan of the river and the pounding of their hearts. When the lights finally disappeared, Francois shut off the engine. The only sound left was the hiss of rain on metal. They drifted in silence, the glow of Paris now a faint shimmer behind them. Moreau exhaled, his voice low. "You'll clear the city now. We'll hide the barge in the reeds near Choisy. From there, another cell will take you to Orleans. After that—" He stopped, listening. From somewhere upstream came a faint rumble. Engines. Fast. Francois went pale. Motor launches. Germans. They are sweeping the river. Edwards looked to the dark water ahead. The current grew stronger, the sound of a weir rising in the distance. Moreau's eyes met his. "If we stay on the water, we're dead." He pointed toward the far bank, a dense stand of willows and reeds. "We swim." Edwards stayed at him. "In this, we'll freeze." Moreau smiled grimly. "Better cold than captured." Without another word, he jumped into the river. Edwards hesitated only a second before following, the icy water swallowing him whole. The shock hit like a punch, stealing his breath. He kicked hard, fighting the current, following the faint shadow of Moreau toward the far bank. Behind them, the German boat searchlights cut through the fog, sweeping, searching, hunting. Edward's hands found the muddy bank. He pulled himself onto the shore, gasping. Moreau helped him up. They collapsed in the reeds, silent, dripping, half dead with exhaustion. The lights swept past, then faded away downstream. For a long moment, they just lay there, the world reduced to rain, breath, and heartbeat. Then Moreau spoke, voice hoarse but certain. "Welcome to free France, Lieutenant." But freedom was a fragile word, because somewhere on that same river, the Gestapo had found Francois' barge, and inside, a blooded scrap of paper with a single name written on it. Claire. June 28, 1943, just outside Orleans, France. The dawn crept gray and cold across the countryside, carrying with it the sound of distant engines and church bells. The air smelled of wet soil and smoke from burning fields. In a thicket beside the river, two men huddled beneath a makeshift torp, Captain Moreau and Flight Lieutenant Jimmy Edwards. Their clothes were still damp, their bodies stiff from 2 nights of flight and hiding. Moreau broke the silence first, voice low but firm. "The next safe house is 20 kilometers east. A farm outside Orleans. We go by foot, through the fields. No roads, no villages." Edwards nodded, flexing his sore hands. He hadn't slept properly in days. His body ached, but his mind burned with the image of that name, Claire, found on the barge. The Germans knew. Somehow, they had tied her to him. As they moved through the forest, the canopy swallowed them in shifting light. The world felt smaller here, the air thick, heavy with tension. Each bird call, each crack of a branch made both men freeze. By noon, they reached the edge of the woods and saw it. A small stone farmhouse surrounded by golden fields of wheat. Laundry flapped lazily on a line. To anyone else, it looked peaceful. But to the resistance, this was a relay post, a halfway mark between Paris and the free zones to the south. Moreau motioned for silence. "We wait until dark," he whispered. They watched from the cover of hedgerows as a cart rolled up the date road. A woman stepped down, young, in a plain dress, a basket in her arms. She looked around cautiously, then disappeared inside. Moreau studied her through his binoculars. "That's Elise. She runs messages for the Marquis." Edwards hesitated. "Does she know we're coming?" "She knows someone is," Moreau said. "But the fewer names, the better." When dusk fell, they crossed the field in a crouching run. The woman met them at the door, her face pale but determined. "You're late," she said softly. "We had company," Moreau replied. The Gestapo's moving south. She nodded and gestured them inside. The farmhouse was small but neat, its walls lined with old photographs and the faint smell of bread. In the corner, a radio set hummed softly beneath a white cloth. Elise poured them tea. "You'll leave before sunrise," she said. "There's a truck that runs flour to Limoges. The driver's one of ours. From there, you'll find the escape line." Edwards leaned forward. "Has anyone heard about Claire from Beauvais?" Elise froze. Her eyes flicked toward Moreau, then back to Edwards. "Why do you ask?" "She helped me escape," he said. "If the Germans know her name." Elise's voice dropped to a whisper. "They do." The room went still. Even the radio's hum seemed to fade. Elise continued, barely audible. "They raided Beauvais 2 nights ago. Arrested everyone connected to Marcel's farm. Neighbors. Workers. The girl. Claire. They took her alive." Edward's throat closed. He stared at the table, his hand tightening around the silver cross at his neck. "What will they do to her?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. Moreau looked at him steadily. "They'll question her. Try to find us. But listen to me. If you go back, you die. And her sacrifice means nothing." Edwards rose, shaking his head. "I can't leave her. Not after what she did." "Jimmy." Moreau's tone hardened. "Do you think she'd want that? She risked everything to put you on that plane home. Don't throw it away for guilt." The air between them crackled. Grief, rage, exhaustion, all fighting for space. Then Elise turned up the radio. "Quiet," she said. A burst of static, then a coded broadcast from London, the BBC. 3 beeps. Then a voice reading meaningless phrases that were anything but meaningless. "Le jardinier perdu ses gants. The gardener has lost his gloves." Moreau's head snapped up. "That's it. That's our signal. Operation Etoile Libre is active." Elise looked between them. "That's the truck route to Limoges. It's leaving tonight." Edward swallowed hard. He could feel the war closing in. The noise, the blood, the unbearable truth of what had been lost. He looked again at the cross, shining faintly in the lamplight. "Then we go," he said quietly. They left before the moon rose. The field shimmered under a veil of mist, the sound of crickets masking their footsteps. But as they neared the road, Edwards heard something that made him stop cold. The distant growl of an engine approaching too fast, too steady. Headlights flared through the darkness. "Down!" Moreau hissed. They dove into the ditch just as a black car roared past. Gestapo. Its siren screamed once, then cut off abruptly as it turned down the same road they were meant to take. Elise's voice trembled. "They know. They've found the route." Moreau looked at Edwards. "We're not walking into that." Edwards shook his head slowly. "Then we find another way." But the sound of the siren still echoed through the hills, fading and returning like an omen. Because somewhere on that same road, another truck was heading to Limoges, and inside, under guard, sat a terrified young woman in a torn dress and mud-stained shoes. Claire. And the Gestapo wasn't moving her south for trial. They were moving her for bait. June 29th, 1943, 3 a.m. Outside Limoges, central France. The sky was black glass, moonless, silent, the kind of stillness that precedes thunder. A narrow road wound between low hills, bordered by dense pine forest. The only light came from the lamps of a lone truck grinding up the slope, its engine straining, its wheels splattering mud. Inside, Claire sat on the wooden floor, wrists bound, a strip of rough cloth cutting into her skin. 2 Gestapo officers sat opposite her, their faces half-lit by the glow of a cigarette. She stayed at the ember as if it were a heartbeat. They hadn't spoken to her in hours. They didn't need to. She knew why she was still alive. When they found her at Marcel's farm, she hadn't cried. Not even when they showed her the burnt remains of the house. They asked about the English pilot, about the resistance, about her father. She said nothing. So they killed a neighbor in front of her, then another. Still nothing. Now, she was their insurance, their net. A word come in. The older officer muttered, "He will come." Claire didn't move. Her wrists ached. Her throat was raw. But her eyes burned with quiet defiance. Somewhere deep down, she believed he might still be alive. And she knew, if he was, he would come. Meanwhile, 20 kilometers north, Jimmy Edwards crouched in a ditch beside Captain Moreau, staring at the glow of Limoges on the horizon. The rain had stopped, but the air was heavy, electric. The countryside smelled of wet pine and diesel. Moreau held a field map under the dim beam of his flashlight. "There's no truck depot at Limoges anymore," he said. "They've turned it into a regional Gestapo post. They'll move prisoners through there before transport to Germany." Edward's voice was low. "She's there. I know it." Moreau frowned. "And you know it's a trap?" Edwards nodded slowly. "Doesn't matter." The captain exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "Do you have any idea how many have died trying to raid that compound?" "It's suicide." "Maybe," Edwards said. "But she saved me. I won't let them use her as bait." He pulled something from his pocket, the silver cross. It glinted faintly in the dark. "If she's alive, she'll be wearing this." Moreau looked at him for a long moment, then cursed softly in French. "All right. If we're going to die, we do it properly." 2 hours later, they stood at the edge of the Limoges rail yard, a sprawling tangle of tracks and warehouses lit by spotlights. German trucks lined the platforms. Armed guard patrolled in pairs, rifles slung across their backs. The rain returned, soft at first, then harder, drumming against tin roofs and cobblestones. It was their only cover. Moreau handed Edwards a captured MP40. "2 magazines. Make them count." He nodded. They moved through the shadows, hugging the edge of a maintenance shed. The smell of oil and coal filled the air. A German soldier passed close, his cigarette glowing like a firefly. Edwards froze. The man exhaled, turned away, gone. Moreau pointed toward a warehouse near the loading cranes. "That's where they hold prisoners before transfer." They slipped closer, the rain muffling their steps. The door was padlocked, but Moreau pulled a small charge from his satchel, a British-made No. 10 fuse cap, smuggled months earlier. He set it on the lock, lit the fuse, and stepped back. Click! Pop! The lock dropped. They slipped inside. The room was dim, lit only by a single hanging bulb. Crates, chains, and the faint smell of blood. And in the corner, a figure, tied to a chair. "Claire." She looked up. For a heartbeat, disbelief crossed her face. Then tears. "Jimmy." He ran to her, cutting the ropes with his knife. "You're safe. I've got you." But her eyes widened in panic. "No, Jimmy, it's..." The sound hit them first, boots on concrete. Then the door slammed open. Floodlights. Shouts. Handhawk. Moreau spun, firing. The warehouse exploded in chaos. Gunfire. Shouting. Splintering wood. Edwards pulled Claire down behind a crate, bullets ripping through the air above them. Moreau shouted, "Go. Get her out." Edwards hesitated, then grabbed her hand. They sprinted toward the side door. Moreau laid down covering fire, muzzle flash lighting his face in staccato bursts. A grenade clattered across the floor. He saw it too late. The explosion threw Edwards off his feet. The world became light and noise. Ringing ears, burning lungs, smoke thick as fog. When he came to, the warehouse was half collapsed. Moreau was gone. German voices shouted orders outside. Clay's hand was still in his. "Can you run?" he asked, coughing. She nodded weakly. "The train yard. It leads to the river." They stumbled through the wreckage, slipping between crates and shattered glass, emerging into the storm. Searchlights sliced the darkness. They ran. Rifle fire cracked behind them. Bullets kicked up gravel near their feet. Edwards fired back blindly, dragging Claire through the maze of railcars. Then, salvation. A freight train stood idling on the far track, steam curling from its wheels. Its destination painted crudely on the side, Toulouse. He boosted her up, then climbed aboard as the locomotive began to move. The rain swallowed the sound of pursuit. The lights of Limoges faded behind them. They were alive. Barely. Claire slumped against him, shaking, half from cold, half from shock. "Jimmy," she whispered, "they'll follow." He looked down at her, blood running down his arm, the cross between them. "Then we stay ahead of them," he said quietly. The train rattled south into the black countryside, sparks flying from the wheels, two silhouettes against the flickering light, bound for a border that might as well have been another world. But deep in Limoges, the Gestapo wasn't done. A surviving officer picked up a torn scrap of paper from the warehouse floor, the map Bernard had drawn weeks before. Every safe house, every name, encircled in red, the final route to Spain. The chase was no longer about one pilot. It was about baning the entire resistance to the ground. The freight train ate the kilometers like an animal swallowing prey. Rain hammered the tin roof in a steady, hungry rhythm. Inside the dim, lumber-stacked carriage, Claire slept with her head on Edward's shoulder, her breathing shallow and ragged, a thin line of red at the corner of a mouth where a shard of glass had nicked her lip. He kept one hand on the silver cross at his throat, as if his fingers could press the people who'd saved him, Marcel, Bernard, Father Reynard, back into the world. Outside, the French countryside was a blur of dark hedgerows, the occasional farmhouse a pale rectangle in the rain. The carriage smelled of wet wood, coal smoke, and the iron tang of fear. Every station the train passed felt like a small gamble. A set of uniforms on the platform, the cold lantern glow of a platform guard, a pair of boots pacing the rails. Edward's imagined eyes scanning the windows, lips moving as someone recited his description. His uniform was buried in a crate, his hair cut and suit swapped by DuPont's tailor, but his face still belonged to the RAF. Toulouse came and went in the night, its lights like dying stars. The network had arranged a courier to meet them, a man called Lefevre, Bernard's lost instruction. Lefevre was a lean, hulk-faced baker who used his delivery wagon to ferry fugitives through checkpoints. He waited on the outskirts with flour-smeared hands and a rope smile, and for a few hours they melted into the working rhythms of a city still pretending normalcy. Bread, a crust for Claire, coffee that tasted like salvation. Lefevre spoke little, eyes always on the street. He moved with the practiced caution of a man who'd learned to count the sound of boots. From Toulouse they took smaller trains, then jeeps that bounced them across rutted roads. The further south they went, the thinner the air of occupation felt, fewer checkpoints, more farmers nodding in quiet recognition as the convoy passed. Yet the shadow of Limoges followed them like a bad scent. The Gestapo had Bernard's map now. Whole lines of escape had been inked in red. Safe houses that once brimmed with whispers now lay empty or burned. Every relay that had once been a lifeline might now be a pit. At dusk on the fourth day, they reached a village at the edge of the foothills, a place of clustered stone houses and a single church spire. There, a wiry man named Miguel was waiting, part smuggler, part guide, all grit. He wore a battered beret and carried a knapsack that had seen too many winters. His hands were calloused, his smile quick but distant. Pyrenees, Miguel asked, voice like gravel. You think I don't know why men come south in June? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. He led them to a barn where the air was warm and sweet with hay. You rest. Tomorrow before dawn, we go. Dawn was a rumor on the horizon. The guide moved like a ghost, stoking a small fire, boiling water, handing out thin soup. He checked their boots and bandaged Clay's wrists again with gentle, efficient hands. Miguel's eyes flicked to Edward's often, measuring him, cataloging strength. You're not a good liar, he said at one point. Edwards almost smiled. Exhaustion made everything brittle. They left before the rooster. The foothills were a soft, green slope, early morning mist clutching the ground. The ascent began on a narrow sheep track that clung to the side of the rise like a memory. The sky was clear for the first time in days. The mountains rose in jagged teeth against a pale sweep of blue. Birds argued from above. For a brief moment, freedom felt possible. But roots have mouths. Stories leak. And men in uniforms talk to other men in uniforms if the price is high enough. Halfway up, as the path narrowed and the air thinned, Miguel halted and held up a hand. He listened. Edwards could hear it. Not the wind, not the sheep, but the hollow, metallic whisper of engines far below. And then, slashed across the valley like a deliberate streak, the glint of headlights. Motorcycles, two abreast, cutting the serpentine roads. Gestapo, or collaborators. It didn't matter. Both wore the same hunger. Miguel's jaw tightened. He turned to Edwards and Claire, his voice a low, urgent rasp. They know of a movement, he said. Maybe from Limoges. Maybe someone on the route talked. We must change the crossing. Change meant a longer climb, a higher pass, a route the snow still held in pockets despite the month. It meant freezing at night, more exhaustion, and the knowledge that every step farther from the known was one more step into a place where no one promised safety. They skirted a goat track and swung into a ravine where the sun had yet to reach. The air grew colder. Hedges gave way to scree. The path thinned to a single line of rock, and at times they had to use hands as much as feet. Claire stumbled once, face white, and Edwards caught her before she fell. He could feel the pull of sleep tugging at him like a net. His muscles ached. His mind added up losses like an accounting ledger. Marcel, Bernard, Reynard, Moreau. Men who'd given everything to keep him alive. Night fell early in the mountains. Miguel found a small shepherd's hut hidden like a secret in a fold of the land. They fed on hard cheese and stale bread, and the hut's old woman, gray-haired and toothless, wrapped Claire in a wool blanket and pressed her palm against the girl's cheek like a benediction. For the first time since the crash, Claire closed her eyes without flinching. They slept in a ragged, shallow way. At 2 a.m, Edwards woke to the sound of Miguel whispering with someone at the door. He rose and pushed aside the curtain. 2 men stood in the black, faces indistinct in the moonlight. Miguel's hand was on his knife. No, Miguel hissed. The men's voices carried. Informant says the pilot goes through these hills tonight. He will bring the girl. One voice was French, the other accented German. The informant. A name from the paper Bernard had died to give up. A neighbor. A safe housekeeper turned traitor for a bottle of brandy and a promise of bread. Edwards felt bile rise. He swallowed. He could have crawled back into the bed and pretended to sleep. He could have taken Claire and tried to run. Instead, he felt the old compulsion. To act, to protect, to make the debt owed to those who died worth the risk. Miguel's voice cut through the night, low and merciless. We leave now. By the ridge. We cut the path off at the goat track. Edwards dressed in the dark, knees trembling, not from cold but from fear dressed as adrenaline. Outside, the night smelled of wet stone and iron. Under the sky, 3 silhouettes slipped across the slope: Miguel, Edwards, Claire, and then one more figure, moving with a silent, human certainty, a shadow that might be a hunter or salvation. They crested the ridge into the moonlight, and there, set like a trap at the narrowest part of the track, stood a lantern, a folded blanket, and 2 rifles crossed against the stone. Another human face turned toward them. It was not Miguel's informant. It was Captain Moreau, alive, mud-smeared, blood along his sleeve. His eyes met Edwards with a look that said everything. He had gambled and lost, retaken ground, paid for it with his own blood, and he had brought men with him. Behind Moreau, in the shadows like a second heartbeat, something moved, the ripple of black coats descending the slope in the valley below. They were surrounded, not by soldiers at the rails, but by men whose hands had been bought and eyes that had been turned. Moreau lifted a pistol. "No retreat," he said, his voice not brave, broken, determined. Edwards could feel the mountain itself holding its breath. Then, a shout from below. Flashlights stabbing the dark like knives. Dogs baying. You can almost feel the cold cut through to the bone. The raised panic of men trapped between cliffs and choices. No easy way out. No clean victory. And at the edge of the ridge, Claire whispered, "What do we do now?" The answer was a rifle across Moreau's palm, and a sound like thunder, the first beat of a firefight that would decide who would live to tell the story.